Okay.
How's that? Going to work? Thank you for all coming today to this event. How many have been to Eli before? So there's a couple first timers here. Okay, well, welcome to Eli, Staged Up. This is a product, a part of the Lake County Historical Society, and if you've been watching this happen, it's been growing and evolving into what's going to be a wonderful place for preservation of history and a presentation of history to try to keep our local Lake County history alive for ourselves and future generations. So if you come back next year and year after that and year after that, you'll be seeing more and more things happening out and around us, and more events like this that are going to be sharing some history. A little bit about myself. I am a former president of the Lake County Historical Society, and as of last week they've been asking me to take it over again, and I kind of thought about it for a bit, and I politely said no. I'm still very much involved with it, but my life is not going to allow that. So I've been very much involved in the Historical Society for the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. I'm also a real estate broker. That's my trade. I've lived in Lake County for 30 years, but actually like 35 years, been in real estate for 30 years. And what else can I say about myself? My passion, of course, is history, and that happened, as I explained to you folks, way back when I was 6 years old. I saw something history related when I was 6. I asked my mom, and then she started telling me about her grandparents and great-grandparents who were Civil War soldiers. You'll never guess what side they fought on. Yes. But that got me very passionate about it as a 6-year-old, and I was a voracious reader even as a young person, and I just really, you know, if there was a book or a picture or a painting or a movie or anything about the Civil War, I was there. It was very distracting for me because some of my other grades suffered. If you saw me in history class, you thought I was an extreme genius. If you saw me in the other class, you know, I was kind of like, you know, special needs, because no matter what class I was in, I was thinking about what I learned in history class and what couldn't wait till the next day. So that's a little bit me, and I also was involved in setting up a Civil War roundtable in Lake County. So if you're really interested in like history in the Civil War, once a month, first Monday of every month, there's a Civil War roundtable up in Upper Lake, and that goes from like 6:15 to 8:15, and we do presentations on the war. And there's like 3 groups, not formal, but it's kind of like this. You got your northern people, you got your southern people, and you got your kind of in between. Like, wow, this is cool. And we have some good discussions about history, and we kind of dig down deep and learn a whole bunch about it. So that's the first Monday of every month, and if you're interested in that, let me know. So we're here to kind of talk about both those things. You got Lake County history, and you got Civil War history, and how do they intersect? You know, I mean, what battles were fought in Lake County? Well, you know, not a whole lot. I'm sure there was some Southern women married to Northern men in Lake County. They fought some pretty good battles, but largely, we were free from a lot of problems in Lake County. There were a couple things I wanted to share. There's one story I want to kind of lay out, but there were a couple direct links to Lake County and Civil War history. Obviously, people that migrated here before the Civil War, some came from the south, some came from the north. So they both brought their loyalties and allegiances and prejudices and their attitudes and politics here with them. And they all seemed to get along pretty well until the war started getting closer. And then you have the secession, you have the Civil War, and now you got people like, you know, go south, go north. And predominantly this was populated mostly by northern people. And then as the war drug on and the news got worse and worse for the south and better and better for the north, apparently there was a certain amount of gloating on the northern side, and some of the southern people here felt they were a little persecuted. The typical name that was given to southern people was secesh, for secessionists. They were called, oh, those guys are secesh. They weren't called necessarily rebels or Confederates or Southerners. They were just referred to as secesh. So see, you look at letters of people back then, they're referring to their neighbors as, I think they're secesh, and those guys are secesh. And in Scotts Valley, I think the family name was Moore, M-O-O-R-E, and in Upper Lake, the family name was Tallman. You might be familiar with the Tallman Hotel. Those were southern people, or as the locals would call them, they were secesh. And then what happened was the Moores and the Tallmans, they had a intermarriage. There was, I think, a son from the Tallmans married a daughter from the Moores. So they were close families. But when the war ended, there was a lot of sadness and grief going on, you know, with all Southerners about not just that they lost the war, but that their homeland was pretty much devastated. And then you had this other factor of now the gloating guys who, we won and we're going to show you and we're now on top and you guys don't, blah, blah, blah. So a lot of people all through America, they just left. They said, we're not going to stay here. So you had a lot of Southerners that left into Mexico and try to see their way there. There are a lot left to Brazil. And even today there's a town, and they're called Confederados. And there's a town that they've migrated to or created. And to this day, even though they're assimilated into the Portuguese culture and everything, every year they'll have a Confederate festival, kind of like their own pear festival. And they all dress up like this, and they got Confederate flags, they sing Dixie, and they do square dances, and they all the girls dressed in big, and it's weird if you're just an American not realizing it, you're just driving through Brazil, and all of a sudden it's like all these Confederate flags, like what the heck's going on? But that's been going on since the Civil War. That's a Confederate ancestral thing. Well, the Moors and the Tallmen, some of them also has associations with some Southern people in Healdsburg and other areas. And some of them said, we're not going to stay here. This is just too nasty. So they packed up and they went to Chile. And they formed a colony in the outskirts, on the, what I guess would be the edges of Chile, where they had their own their native Chilean population, Indian population, that they were fighting back and forth. And it didn't quite really work out well for them. After a few years, a lot of them came home. A lot of them stayed in Chile, but kind of moved into town. And it just didn't work out for them very well. But the interesting thing was the Tallman Hotel went through its own metamorphosis. It was kind of falling apart, and then the butchers bought it and rehabilitated it and put it on the internet. And one day out of the blue, Bernie gets an email from somebody in Chile and saying, God, we have pictures of the original one, and you guys did such a great job. That was my great-great-grandfather that formed it. We're all down here. Thank you for doing this. And now they got a connection of the original family of Chilean Confederados from Lake County. So that was a neat story there. And you got lots of stories like that of different things. History has we were just talking earlier about how some people think, history's boring. Obviously, you guys don't think history's boring. You're here today. So unless you're very boring people and enjoy being bored, you guys think history is alive and you're here to get not just educated but entertained, because it is a very entertaining story, some of these things. And history has this weird thing, and I think it's true in all of our lives. We can go back at a certain point and look at a point in our own lives where it's like relationship. Maybe you're in high school, and it's like, if I'm a guy, am I going to go out with Mary or Sally? And you end up going with Mary, and that changes your life. You end up marrying Sally, and you have children, and you end up moving to Mary's hometown, and your whole life's changed, and it changes the lives of all the people around you. Now, the parallel universe is what if Big Sally? And Big Sally, then these people weren't born, that town doesn't have a mayor, and these people, and maybe over here you become a bandit or something, and because of that situation, who knows? It's just, it really changes life. My own brother's case, he was driving down the road, the light turned yellow, so he hit the brakes, and he's thinking at the time what my career is going to be. He looked at a real estate office, pulled right, pulled in there. He became a realtor because of that light turned yellow. He married, found his wife there. They married, they had children. They got me in real estate. It got me in Lake County. I wouldn't be here talking to you if that light stayed green for one more second. History is remarkable like that. And our story of Lake County and the Civil Wars kind of has one of those little things. And that's all I have for you today. Any questions? No, I actually. I'm going to tell you. Yeah, sure. There's questions.
It's not really questions. Just somebody where I work found this 2011 anniversary of Lake County thing, and in there they had these little excerpts about the history of the county. And one of the things they mentioned that relates to what you're talking about, maybe you can expound on, was there was at least one family that came here, I think from the north, because they didn't want to get their kids get drafted.
Ah.
And they actually built a fort. They called it a fort, but never really used it.
I'm not sure there's a connection between the first part of what you said, as far as people just trying to evade the draft by going somewhere where they might not get drafted, versus the fort.
Well, they thought they'd need the fort, but what they said in this article, they'd need the fort in case the government came and tried to.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that. I mean, I understand somewhere between the Lower Lake and Middletown, there's some mounds that, and just in case the Confederates came, there was a couple families that said, well, we'll hold them off here. And they built some fortifications there that never were needed or used. So I wonder if those two stories conflated, or maybe the real story is that they were trying to, draft evaders were trying to prepare for when the draft people came in. We're going to fight them. So that's interesting.
It was as you described it. It was Earth Mound.
Yeah,
And they never
it might be the same one. It might be the same one. I think it was, and supposedly, I haven't been there, but supposedly if you went there today, there's not much there. If you didn't know it was a fort, you just see these mounds. In fact, if you look real carefully, they're actually were designed to be some sort of fortification or something. So, what is the strange intersection of history that connected Lake County? It's kind of strange because this particular intersection, if it just went slightly a different thing back in the Civil War, it would have such a big ramification in Lake County. What's our biggest feature? And it's arguable what our biggest feature is. It could be Mount Canocti, it could be the geothermal. I think a lot of us would say it, if not the biggest feature, one of our biggest features is our lake.
Is the lake.
We're defined by the lake. We're Lake County, we're Clear Lake, and that is our biggest feature. So what would it be like if Clear Lake, we've had kind of a drought, so it's kind of been lower than normal. What if it was even lower than this? What if it was like another 5 or 6 feet lower? Where it'd still be some water out there, but it would also be a large mud hole. It would be much smaller, much more contracted. It's a shallow lake to begin with. So imagine the lake with a lot less water in it. It would probably destroy property values because if you lived on the lake, the water would be 100, 200, 300 feet out, and it would no longer have the value. It would just change everything. So why is the lake the way it is? Well, the Civil War. And what's the connection? Well, we've got to go back in time. In Georgia, in I think it's McIntosh County, there was a family called the Floyds. And they were a fairly well-to-do family, had a plantation. And he had a young man lived there named Richard Floyd. And the family was able to get Richard into the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis. And this is right before the Civil War. So he's attending Annapolis when George secedes. And when George seceded, a lot of young men that were in the military had to make a decision. Is my loyalty to the federal government, or is my loyalty to my home state and my people there? And it was a tough decision for a lot of people. Robert E. Lee had a big, difficult decision that he had to make. He had split loyalties, and at the end, Robert E. Lee and Richard Floyd said, "No, if there's going to be a war, I got to go south. I got to help defend whatever happens, and whatever happens, happens. I can't fight against them. I got to support them." Richard Floyd made the same decision. So now he is a somewhat highly educated young man, but now somewhat educated military naval guy. So of course the newly formed Confederate States of America get him involved in the Confederate Navy. And the Confederate Navy at this point doesn't exist very much because they don't have a Navy. It's a brand new country, so everything's brand new. They have to start from scratch. Well, one of the things that they attempted to do is that they still had a lot of cotton, and England needed cotton. England declared neutrality in this whole thing. They were not going to get involved. So that means certain laws were into play where they couldn't necessarily build boats and armaments for either side. They had to be careful about, there were some rules of engagement on that. Well, the South certainly needed them to build ships. So with the cotton, they were able to get somebody to build these ships, sell them to a middleman that they could legally sell to, then a middleman would sell them to the Confederates, and that's how the Confederates got the ships. And the idea of these ships, where they're going to be merchant raiders, they're going to be surface merchant raiders on the high seas, much like how pirates would operate, but they weren't pirates because they were under a national flag and they were sanctioned. The North, of course, viewed them as pirates because they didn't officially recognize the South as an independent country, so they viewed them as pirates, but the rest of the world viewed them as legitimate merchant raiders. And I think that England made 4 of these merchant raiders. And that was the South's answer to the blockade. When the Civil War started, Lincoln ordered a blockade to squeeze out the Confederacy. So they had all their ships blocking every port to try to starve out the North. So the Confederates thought, we can't compete against that. But we've got 4 or 5 ships crisscross the Atlantic sinking merchant marine. That could be the same thing. That would also starve them out and cause them a lot of issues and problems and things. So the one ship that's the most famous is the CSS Alabama. It ended up sinking like 68 Union shipping things before it got sunk and off the coast of France. And then there was the Shenandoah, which it has an interesting story. After the war was over, Lee surrenders. It was up in Alaska, in the Aleutian Islands, and sinking a whaling fleet. Very successful. But the war ends, and there's no way it knows the war's ending, so it's coming down the coast towards San Francisco, still thinking the war's on. It gets to San Francisco, and it's wondering, what do we do? Can we take San Francisco? No. Can we bomb San Francisco? No. Can we blockade it? So they don't know what to do, but they decided to blockade it for a while and just see what comes from that. And then some British people went out and said, here's a newspaper from a few months ago, Lee surrendered, the war's over. And they thought, dang, they're all kind of ticked off about it. Well, come on in, we'll take care of you, we'll ship you back home, no problem. They said, no, we're not going to surrender to the Yankees. And they went all the way around South America and came up the Atlantic and turned themselves into England, where the ship originated from. So they never surrendered. So there was still a Confederate ship on the high seas months after the war was over. That was the Shenandoah. So you had the Alabama, you had the Shenandoah, but the one we're going to focus on is the Florida. The CSS Florida was a good-looking surface raider and very fast, and Richard Floyd was assigned to that. It slipped into Mobile Bay, Alabama. They got to the crew, that's where Richard got on, and it slipped back out again, and it had a very prosperous career from their perspective of sinking Yankee shipping. So of course the Yanks had a lot of ships crisscrossing the seas trying to hunt these guys down. And like I say, eventually they caught the Shenandoah, or they caught the Alabama, and now they're chasing the Florida. Well, the Florida is at this point, this is October 1864, so the war is kind of starting to turn against the South. It's pretty much over at that point, but they're still fighting. Things are going bad. Sherman is doing his march to the sea, and Petersburg is surrounded, and everything's going bad. But they still got the ship out there. So it is down by Brazil, and it goes into a port that's spelled B-A-H-A-I. So I don't know how to pronounce it, but I call it Baha'i, but some people call it something else. But for lack of a better thing, if you'd have a better way to tell me, let me know. But down in Baha'i, Brazil, the Florida goes in to get supplies, kind of rest a little bit, and Brazil's also neutral, so they can't resupply them with guns or that type of stuff, but they are allowed, belligerents allowed to park in a little R&R, and then they got to go. So they're doing that R&R that's allowed, and in comes the USS Wachusett, which is one of the big American U.S. Battleships at the time that was on the prowl for the Florida. So the Florida is sitting there, and in comes the Wachusett, and now it's a neutral port, so they can't fight, right? So the Wachusett looking and said, there it is, there's the Florida, this is the thing we're looking for. We've been, the long and loose of Florida is right here before us, So the Brazilian authorities, they were talking to both sides, they're saying, well, we don't want you guys doing anything. You know the rules, you can't fight. You park over there, you park over here. We're going to put some of our Navy vessels in between. No funny business, and then you guys can go out and fight. But you got to go 50 miles out before you fight. So the Florida guys were saying, to Brazil, we don't trust the Yanks. They don't treat us like a legal belligerent. They view us as rebels that should be hung. So they don't play by the rules. You guys play by the rules. The rest of the world play by the rules, but the Yanks don't play by the rules, at least as far as we're concerned. And we don't trust them. So they said, oh, no, don't worry about it. We'll put a lot of boats and things, and they won't touch you. If they do, we'll punish them. Meantime, on the Wachusett, they're saying, if we get out there in the high seas, that's a faster ship. We'll never see him again. If we're going to get him, we got to get him now. So that night, when the Confederates finally felt assured, safe enough to where, okay, maybe the Brazilians will protect us, as they promised, they drew straws to see who got shore leave and who stayed on boat. And it just so happened that Richard Floyd stayed on the boat that night. He was going to get the next shift. And here's the thing. Now, if he gets the other shift where he goes ashore that night, everything in Lake County changes. This whole story of Lake County radically changes if he goes ashore. Instead, he's on board. So what happens is he's on board, keeping watch, keeping an eye on the Yankees. The Yankees, they steam up and they back up like they're leaving, but they come around and ram the Florida and start firing into it and trying to sink it, but they don't sink it. But meantime, their Marines are shooting into them, and the Confederates are not prepared, and they're being shot and killed and everything, and they demand surrender. And the Florida says, "Hey, you got us. We're helpless." So they board the Florida, steam it up, and they head out of the port. And it's a gross violation of international law. Brazil goes berserk. They send their Navy out after it. They can't catch up to them. They protest, and the end of that story is that the United States was forced to return the Florida, but on the way out of Baltimore, it got mysteriously rammed again and sunk. But by that time, the war was almost over, and it really was irrelevant. Meantime, Floyd is captured. They insist that he be released back to England, where he can get another Confederate ship, maybe the Florida again. So he's waiting there for another Confederate ship, and the war ends, and he's stuck in England. Now, he already has learned that the raiding on the Georgia coast was pretty brutal. There was a lot of burning and a lot of terror, a lot of horrible things that occurred along the Georgia coast. There were the Union had a spot where they could send boats and land almost with impunity anywhere along the coast and just burn it out and do whatever they wanted to do. Well, that included his plantation. There was nothing to come home to. His plantation was gone. It was wiped out. A lot of his people were dead. So he decided, I'm not going to go home. So he thought, why not go to California? And he went around the Horn and ended up in San Francisco. So the war's over, and now you got this southern former well-to-do family person who used to be in the academy, was somewhat of an officer in the Confederate Navy on the Florida. Now he's in San Francisco looking for work. And all the people he meets a guy by the name, I get these two guys mixed up, so I'm going to attribute this first guy the name John, and the other guy Thomas. I might have the John and Thomas backwards, so if I do, forgive me. He bumps into John Frazier. John Frazier takes a liking to him. They became friends, and John Frazier says, I've got a brother in Lake County, which at that time it was Lake County because we became a county in 1861, and they're the borax mines. They need some help, so you need some work. Here's a letter, take it up to Thomas Frazier. He'll hire you and see what happens. So he was great. So he goes up there, gets a job, works for Thomas for a while, and while he's up here, he rides his horse around Lake County several times, and he just loves it. A lot of you are here today, I think, because you may have had that same experience. You came to Lake County and thought, wow, I'm here because my dad came up here, and he just fell in love with it. He came over the hill and looked at it and said, this is God's country. And maybe not everybody has that experience, but my dad did, and apparently some of you did, and Richard Floyd had that experience. It was like, he's arrived. He fell in love with it. But meantime, he's not a miner, he's a sailor, and the other brother, John Frazier, calls him up, hey, hello, no, on that phone actually. But I think it was a text. But anyway, he contacts him and says, there's a boat over here in San Francisco that needs a captain, and it goes between here and Hawaii, and it's like a mail boat and supply boat, but it's also people can tour. They can vacation on the boat and go to Hawaii and come back. And so he says, I'll take that job, because that's more in my line of work. So he goes back to San Francisco. And this is where history gets kind of weird as I'm studying this stuff. It starts opening these other doors, of things. So he's on this boat going back and forth to Hawaii. Meantime, hold all that story together, and let me kind of go to a slightly other story here that kind of affects this whole thing. Down in the 1820s, on the Mississippi River in Louisiana, there's a family on a plantation. They have a young daughter. I think her name is Eliza. And Eliza is young and she needs a tutor, so they're looking for a tutor for their daughter. And down comes a flatboat with the family on its way to New Orleans. So he says, you can stay with us for a few nights. And the guy says, great, because I like, studying birds and things. And so they're staying there, and I'm looking for a tutor for my daughter. The guy says, well, hey, I'm looking for work. I'll tutor your daughter. So this guy stays there for a while and tutors his daughter. And the reason he really wanted to stay there because the forest outside his plantation was rich in bird life. And the guy starts painting all these pictures and drawing all these pictures and doing all this study. Well, that guy happened to be Audubon. Of all people, that was Audubon, and that plantation still exists. It's now Audubon State Park. And this girl was tutored by Audubon, grew up, and she married a southern gentleman by the name of Lyon, Henry Lyon, and they had a daughter named Cora. She dies, the mother, Eliza, before the Civil War. Henry Lyon and Cora come to California, and he's very well-to-do at this point. He becomes a member of California's first Supreme Court. So he's here with the formation of the state. He's very well-to-do, he's very rich, and he's very popular, very influential. So he's a very influential guy. He's on the state Supreme Court, and he's a great gambler. And the story is that he won a mansion in San Francisco during a gambling session. So him and his daughter one day decide to go to Hawaii. And this young Southern belle meets this dapper young Southern hero, and they fall in love and they get married. And he says, I need to take you to Lake County because I think this is a great spot to live, but let me take you there. So he brings her up here and she falls in love with it. The dad dies and leaves this whole big fortune to the two of them. And they decide that they're going to build a mansion here, and that is, you guys know where Konatai is in Lucerne? That Konatai was named after Richard and Cora Floyd named that whole section. They're the ones who named it. I don't know where that name came from, but they said, we're going to call our land Konatai, and we're going to build a mansion there. And he built what some people say might have been the greatest, nicest, biggest, most beautiful mansion ever in Lake County. He had hundreds of acres over there going up the hill. It was a phenomenal place because of his world travels. He just loved botany and trees and plants. He brought all this non-native stuff there in a very eclectic garden. It was just an amazing place. And while they lived up here, he created this these steamboats that would transport people back and forth across the ocean, or the lake. And that was what he did up here. That was as close as he could be as on the sea. He was like a taxi driver guy on the lake out here. So anyway, so they're up here, and then hold that thought for a moment. Go back to John Fraser. What was John Fraser doing in San Francisco? He was just a common laborer for years and years and years, and he got hired on a ranch owned by a guy by the name of James Lick. Does anybody recognize the name James Lick?
Yeah.
You got the James Lick Freeway, the James Lick High School, James Lick Observatory, all down in San Jose. If you go to the San Francisco Gold Gate Park, the Conservatory of Flowers, that was a donation by James Lick. A couple other things. Anyway, very rich guy. In fact, he's probably the richest man in the west of Mississippi at the time. He built the biggest hotel in the western United States called the James Lick Hotel that survived the earthquake but got burned by the fire. So that was the end of that. Highly eccentric guy. He started as a carpenter in Pennsylvania and fell in love with a girl, got her pregnant back then, very scandalous. And the parents said, we don't want you to have any, we're going to put her in confinement, she's going to have her baby, you get out of here, you're a poor guy. So he went off to make his fortune to get permission to marry this girl. And the rest of his life was this focus to impress that father, and it continued on even after the father died, the wife died. He just kept wanting, and that drove him. He was a little goofy. He ended up making pianos in South America. And then later he heard that there was opportunity in California, so he came up here. But down in South America, he had a friend next to him. He was making pianos, and the friend was over here making chocolate. And this guy gave him he bought a bunch of chocolate to take to San Francisco, and he found the chocolate was almost as good as gold because he brought a lot of gold up with him. A lot of Peruvian gold doubloons he brought with him. But people almost would trade chocolate like they would gold. This is the greatest thing they ever tasted. So he contacted this guy and said, why don't you come to San Francisco? I think your opportunity would be better up here. And that's how Ghirardelli came to San Francisco, was from James Lick. But James Lick has got this eccentric behavior. So the story is one day that he hires a bunch of guys and he tells them, take these bricks, and he made his own bricks. He's a billionaire, but he makes his own bricks, so go figure. But now he's a stack of bricks, and he hires a bunch of guys, moves these bricks over here, they move them. They're done. Now what? Well, take those bricks and move back where you had them. Well, that's crazy. So they do it. Now move them over there. Now move them back. And now we got some trees coming in. I want you to plant them upside down, rootstock up in the air. And one by one, people are quitting. Like, you're crazy. This guy's nuts. And eventually, only one guy comes to work, and that one guy happened to be James Fraser. So he goes to James Fraser and says, everybody else quit. Why do you keep coming back? And James Fraser basically said, you treat me right, you pay me well, you don't ask me to do anything unethical or illegal. It's your money, and it's good exercise. What do you want me to do? And he goes, man, that's what I'm looking for. And he made John Fraser the superintendent of his whole empire. So this John Fraser, that's how Lick chose people by doing crazy stuff like that. There was actually some logic there because now he found a guy with the character he was looking for, and sure enough, John Fraser was this great connection. And then, of all things, you have Richard Floyd getting off the boat. Who's he meet? He meets John Fraser. John Fraser sends him to Lake County. He falls in love with it. He gets married. He comes back. But now he has this connection down there with indirectly with James Lick. Well, where that kind of turns into something is you have this family, the Floyds, have one daughter. They named the daughter after the grandfather, Henry. She's named Henry Augustus I forgot the Lion, yeah, Henry Augustus Lyons Floyd, and so the acronym was HAL, so she went by Hal, but her actual name was Harry, because it was Harry. So it was a strange thing. Lo and behold, she grows up to be a tomboy, and eccentric in her own right. So they're living up here in Konatayi, they're doing a lot of traveling, and he's doing a lot of great stuff for the county and the area, and he's very smart doing all this stuff. Meantime, James Lick has a stroke. He realizes he's going to die. He wants a legacy, and his first plan of action was, I want, well, backing up a little bit, his timing in San Francisco was just before the gold rush. So whenever he was moving and selling cheap to get some cash, guess who's buying? This guy, because he had gold doubloons and chocolate. So he ends up owning much of San Francisco, including everything around Market Street today. That whole section was him. So then when the gold rush created San Francisco to be a boom town, guess who controlled the prime real estate was James Lick. And he just made a fortune. He ends up buying Catalina Island and half a Tahoe, and you know, guys have got a huge fortune, builds this huge hotel. So he's extraordinarily rich. And when he's dying, his first thought is, I want the biggest pyramid in the world built in San Francisco, and that's where I'm going to be buried. And he had the funds to do it. So he's getting all these engineers, they're laying it out, like on this corner, Market Street, and here we're going to have this big building. And somebody says, that's crazy, why would you do that? It's nuts, you know? So he talked him out of it. Instead, that was how the observatory came about. How about you do the biggest, most powerful telescope the world's ever seen so we can study the stars better? That's even better. So he's buried up there on Mount Hamilton underneath the telescope. That's where James Lick is buried. Now, he was very paranoid. He didn't trust anybody, and he had a peculiar way of picking people he trusted, like that story with Frazier. So he asked Frazier, he says, I need somebody. These other guys are all a bunch of, you know, yes men, or they're trying to get my money. I don't trust any of them. Do you know anybody that can take this project on? Because it was beyond Frazier's ability. He says, I know this guy up in Lake County. His name is Richard Floyd. So he sets up a meeting, and the way he judges character, he immediately realizes Floyd's the real deal, and he says, I want you to build my observatory. And he agrees. And for the next several years, that's how Mount Hamilton was recreated from what it was to what it is, because Richard Floyd from Lake County was the one who kind of did all this stuff. But he exhausted himself on it, and when he came back to rest, he just got sick and died. He was like 46 years old, and Richard Floyd dies. And his healthy young wife dies a few months later. Either a broken heart or who knows what, but she dies, okay? Which leaves Harry, the daughter, Hal, this enormous fortune. So she grows up, and she goes between Konatayi and Lake County and the mansion her father wanted a gambling deal in San Francisco. Goes back and forth. She's very popular there because she's very gracious. You know, she's doing a lot of things. She does a lot of things for Lake County. She does a lot of things in San Francisco. She's in all the gossip columns about, is Harry going to get married? Is she going to date the prince? Is she going to date this guy? This rich guy's coming to town. Everybody's doing matchmaking. She's in the gossip column of the time. But she's staying away from everything. Now, Harry, for whatever reason, she got into Shakespeare and things and learned it and studied it and lived it. So her thing was that if you knew her, she insisted that you all get dressed up in Shakespeare, and we lived Shakespeare for a while. So if you enjoyed it, you just loved going to see Harry because we all get to do Shakespeare, and it was great. But the problem with Harry is that when it was done, she still was in the mode. Everybody else would go back to their normal business, and she was still, you know, Romeo, whatever. She was still in that mode. So some people who didn't know her real well thought she was crazy. Her friends kind of knew she was just putting it on because she could be normal, but she was just, that was her sense of humor. And I can kind of relate to that a little bit because I'm kind of quirky myself. But she was extraordinary that well, so a lot of people thought she was crazy. Meantime, she goes to San Francisco, and the cable car is going down below her. She is taking the cable car to wherever she's going, and there's a young, good-looking foreigner on the cable car, the gripman, and she starts talking to him, and he starts telling the story of like, well, I'm from, you know, near Serbia, and we have a little country there. I don't even know what it is. I think Montenegro or something over there. And my family is royalty, and my brother should be king, but there was a war, and my family got thrown out, and we're trying to get funding for a revolution so we can get back the rightful heir on the throne. And most of us, I think, if we heard that from Cable Car Gripman, would think the guy's crazy. But she's like, that's right for Allie. She lives in kind of similar to fantasy land, so she thinks this is great. So she can't wait to get on this cable car to hear more of the story. And the odd thing is, it's now very multi-million-dollar heiress falls in love with this cable car gripman, and she brings him to Lake County. And in the courthouse in Lakeport that's still there, they get married. And it's a shock to everybody. Who is this guy? What's he up to? Is he real? And somewhere not too long after that, she draws up a will that gives, in the event of her death, virtually everything to him. And guess what happens a month later? She dies. In San Francisco, was it poisoning? Was it what? Who knows? We don't know. But a lot of folks said this, we knew it. We knew what he was up to. And, oh look, I got this will, by the way. And he inherits everything, including Kona Tai and all this other stuff. So he chose well. And maybe he killed her, maybe he didn't, who knows. But he is now the guy. The family sues. There's a big court trial here in Lakeport. The judge looks at all the evidence, and the question was she of sound mind? So one side is saying, here's examples of her being crazy. She's always playing Shakespeare in her head. The other side, no, that was perfectly normal. She could do business. She's very intelligent, articulate. We saw the other side of her. The judge, Sayer, he says, nope. In the totality of the evidence, this woman with sound mind, this was a good will. Mr. Gopchevek, you got everything. So Gopchevek ends up with everything. The irony of, or the side note on that is, he wasn't making that stuff up. His family was royalty. They were thrown out, and he did use some of that fortune to help fund his brother regain the crown of whatever principality it was over there. So all that was real. Now, later, going ahead a little farther, World War I comes, and that changes everything. The whole thing about kings and queens kind of went by the wayside. A lot of countries there kind of threw away the king and queen, and the Tsar got killed, and everything changed. Yugoslavia got formed, and all kinds of things happened. So they were still trying to do this stuff, and finally Gopchevek was running out of money, and he told his brother, I'm not going to fund you anymore. I can't do this. And the brother sued him because he says, you promised me, you made a deal with me that if I do this, you'll do this, and now you owe it to me. So it was a legal dispute. And at that point in time, it became kind of a joke. People were joking about it because it was kind of like the media at the time was just making a comical farce out of the whole thing. And the story is, because the brother's name was spelled B-O-Z-O, however that might have been pronounced at the time, that's how the term bozo came from, because they were all saying, this guy, don't be a bozo. They would tell your kids, they're arguing, no, you're being a bozo. You're just like Bozo. And then later came Bozo the Clown. Now, that's true or not, who knows, but that's some people think that. But again, a lot of intersections in history. You got, and so far we've got Lick, we've got Ghirardelli, we've got Autobahn, and now we've got Bozo the Clown. So what does this have to do with why Lake County survived? Well, now we have to go and talk a little bit about Clear Lake. Clear Lake is the largest natural lake in California, and it's, I think, the oldest lake in North America, and there's lots of ways water gets into it, but there's only one way out. There's only one way out of Lake County for the water, and that is, anybody know? Cache Creek. That's the only way out. Now, historically, when you're in Lower Lake and you cross the Lake Street Bridge, where Cache Creek comes through Anderson Marsh and all, it crosses the bridge on the highway, continues on, there's some houses, it continues on, there's Lake Street Bridge. On the highway side of the bridge, right just about maybe 100 feet over, there's a natural rock formation called, they named it somewhere, named it the Grigsby Riffle. And I'm not sure exactly what it looks like, because you can't really see it right now, but how it's described to me is like a flat rock with a ledge that acts as a natural dam. So what happens when it rains, the lake comes up and it spills over the riffle, and then it'll start dropping down, but when it gets level with the riffle, it stops dropping down. So Cache Creek was a seasonal creek. As long as there was a lot of water in the lake, it would flow, but as soon as it got down, it would stop flowing. And then it would only get water from other sources for further downstream, perhaps. So, with that in mind, and where does Cache Creek flow? It flows to Yuba County, and Yuba County is developing as an agricultural area, so they really like to have the water flow. So, the other feature about that section of Cache Creek is it's kind of a narrow thing where the water, when it rains, it can enter the basin of Clear Lake far faster than it can go through. Thus, it can get really high. In fact, the highest flooding was like 100 and some years ago, got to 13 feet above this, okay? And then it took a long time for it to drain down. So someone along the line said, we need to find a way to measure Lake County. And they sent a guy by the name of Rumsey. And Captain Colonel Rumsey, whatever he was, he went there and he said, I'm going to measure it from this point. When the lake gets down to the Grigsby Riffle, that's the 0 point. So sometimes you're going to hear people say, how high is the lake? Well, according to, the Rumsey gauge is at 4.5, which means it's 4.5 feet over the Grigsby Riffle. Now, last year it got the bowl like 1.5 feet or 2 feet below, so it was, -2 Rumsey. And that's what it's based on. So today it is at, I don't know, 1 or 2. It's low, but it's not as low as it was last year. So it's still in the positive figure. But last year when it got below, we were able to go onto the Grigsby Riffle and walk on it, which right now is just covered in gravel. It's like a big gravel bar. So it's an important feature of Lake County. So later what they did was they built a dam, and that's the Cache Creek Dam. That artificially keeps the lake level up. The dam is far higher, so if the lake comes up to 8 feet above Rumsey or whatever, they can stop it, just release a little bit out, just kind of preserve it so then they can let it out all year long. So now not only will they get water all year long, we're going to have higher water levels here in the Cove. So it's a win-win thing. It only backfires on us when it rains so much and they can't let it out fast enough, we flood. And that's an issue, but overall they think it's a worthy thing. But this is before the dam. Go back before the dam. This is how it was controlled. Now, if you are in Yuba and you're relying on this water and it dries up, what happens to your crops? Your crops start getting bad. So what happened back then is Yuba County came up, and some people from Yuba County came up and said, this Ripple, look at all the water back here. Because even now, is there a lot of water there? We're basically almost at 0 Rumsey, and we still got a lot of water. So people at Yuba said, look at all this water. We're dying down here, and this stinking rock is in the way. So they started blasting it out. Because their theory was, if we blast it out and put a gate here, we can open it up anytime we want and let as much water out as we want. Well, people in Lake County realized that if they were able to do that and drain the lake way below that, that's going to destroy the lake. And every movement needs a leader. In Lake County, you had the Prince Gopchevik at Konatai said, man, this is wrong because I got all this lakefront property and you guys got lakefront property and this is our greatest asset. We can't let him do it. So he got basically a posse together and they went out and saw these guys blasting, and with shotguns they stopped them. No gunfire, but they said no more. And he rode on to Sacramento and filed a injunction to stop it. It went up through the courts to the state Supreme Court, and they issued a decree that today is known as the Gopchevik decree. And today, the Gopchevik decree, along with some future decrees, are the decrees that control our lake. Between Lake and Yuba County, you got all this balance. When it's this high, they can take this much water. When it's this high, they can take this much water. And it's a very clever document. It's really well done. Sometimes when politicians get together, God, this is crazy. How did they come up with this? But from what I can gather, these decrees had a lot of wisdom, and they factored in a lot of the realities of the lake water and everything, and kind of balanced the needs out of Lake and Yuba County. And they stopped the blowing up the dam, or blowing up the riffle, and then led the dam, which was more artificially, they can now control it much better, all right? So that's basically how it all comes together, because if Richard Floyd, the night of October in Baha'i, Brazil, gets the wrong straw and he gets to leave on the shore leave, he's not on the boat when the Wachusett rams it, he's not captured. He's still on Brazil, right? If he's not captured, he doesn't end up in Britain waiting a new boat. If he's not there, he doesn't have the opportunity to go to San Francisco and meet John Fraser, who sends him up here to meet Thomas Fraser, who gets the job down there where he meets Cora, who now they get married, and they have Harry, who meets the Prince, who ends up with the property, who's there to lead the posse to stop the riffle. And the riffle gets destroyed, and we have no lake today. So when you say, what was the Civil War have to do with Lake County, I would say everything. And that's the connection. That's a long roundabout way to... when you really love the Civil War, you're always looking for those connections to where you're at. You know, you could send me to the Antarctic and any questions, any of that? A lot of stuff there. Hope I didn't talk too fast.
Very interesting.
How did, well, who owns the water in the lake? We don't. Is it
Correct.
Lolo County or something?
Well,
How did that happen, do you know?
yeah, riparian rights, common law, and if I get this wrong, forgive me, this is how I understand it, so this is just, you know, the next time you come to hear one of these, I might have a totally different story, but as I understand it now, when you have water where different parties can utilize it, and now you have a conflict, you know, I can use it to water my yard, but you can use it to raise crops, and I want it, and you want it, and I don't want you to have it because I need it, you take it, I don't have it. How do you settle this thing? Well, the common law approach to things is that the state, whoever's in charge, gets into the courts or whatever, they get to look at all the facts and say, you know, there's a bigger public interest if you get the water. Because as important as your lawn is, you're feeding 10 million people because you're getting the water and doing that. So it's like, we believe that if only one of you can get the water, you deserve the water. So based on that theory, these injunctions and court rulings and everything ruled that the water above Zero Rumsey belonged to YOLO. The water above Zero Rumsey belongs to YOLO because YOLO's the ones that put up the dam at their expense that artificially keeps it above zero. So all that water is for their purpose. It helps us too, but it's for them to release through the course of the year. So that is their water.
But at Rumsey and below, that's our water.
That's supposed to happen. Now here's where it gets weird. I did a tour at the dam last year. The yellow guy comes over and he tells their side of the story and he has a totally different read on it. But here's the interesting thing. When it got down to below zero, it exposed the sandbar on the riffle. But looking on the bridge on the right side, you see a channel. It's like a man-made cut channel. It's maybe a couple feet deep. It looks like it was man-made. And water was flowing through it, and my thinking was, I asked the guy, I said, did YOLO put that channel in because we're supposed to be at zero, or below zero, which means no water flows over to your side, yet I see water flowing. So what's up with that? Oh no, that's just natural. But it looks like a channel. It's a perfectly carved channel. And he goes, yeah, just who knows, you know. Okay. So basically where it mattered at that point, water is like gold, especially during a drought. Yep. And it wasn't a whole lot of water, but over a period of time that was a lot of water because every foot of lake here, that's a lot of water. We got a big area, so 1 foot of water on that lake, so 2 feet's an enormous amount of water. And that all leaked through. Who should have got paid for that? Because when we take water from the upper part, who are we supposed to get permission from? We got to get permission from Yolo County. If you have a water system here that you pull water out, you're supposed to get permission and pay Yolo County. So my thinking was, they don't want to acknowledge that maybe they did that because all that water would have to be paid back to Lake County. That's my theory, because it's like he got kind of nervous. No, that's natural. Look at these birds over here. I go, I don't want to talk about the birds. I want to talk about the channel. You know? So there's actually what looks to me like a channel cut through the riffle.
How about jamming that up?
That was my suggestion, because I didn't want to start a total firestorm, but I did send pictures of what I saw and my experience to the different boards of supervisors and everybody. And other than Supervisor Farrington, who seemed very interested, all the others were like, we don't want to turn that one over. So I don't know what's going on between us and Yolo County, but there's like a lot of, we don't want to start that one.
We don't want to dig.
We don't want to, yeah, that one's going to, and I thought, okay, whatever, I did my job. But
Phil, didn't Yolo
I'm sorry, I
County,
should have turned this off, so let me just kill it.
didn't Yolo County come over at one time and build pump bases and pump water over there?
Yeah, supposedly I think during World War I or something, that was his story, that that they were pumping water over it, which had the same net effect, but that was during the theory of World War I. That was an emergency where I think he said both sides were okay with it because it's like we needed that, and everybody here said we'll sacrifice the water for the war effort and all that type of thing. But yeah, there was some pumping going on. But when the war was over, Lake County said no more pumping, and all of a sudden there's a channel there. So you know, who knows? But and that thing about the channel only makes itself manifest and becomes an issue during drought years because it has to drop below zero for it to even be a factor. That doesn't happen very often. You know, with El Nino coming, it might not happen for a long time to come. But the last couple of years, it has been a meaningful factor. So we'll see. But good story, and there's a lot more to it. You know what got me on this whole thing? Going back 4 or 5 years ago, this book came out. And I'm going through it because I'm learning about Lake County history, and I'm just fascinated with the pictures and, you know, the little stories. I get towards the back, and there's this, the last chapter 8 says end of an era, and there's this photograph of this sailor. And I read it, and it's a Confederate sailor. And I'm thinking, what the heck is a Confederate sailor picture doing in a book on Lake County? Which started telling in each ensuing page, there's Cora in the black dress, there's Harry in the little skirt next to her. Pictures of Kona Tai in the mansion, and there's Richard when he was working for James Lick. There's Harry as a young lady, and here's some parties, pictures of parties that Harry had up there at Kona Tai. And the last page is the Prince and the Gopchevik brothers, basically. And I read all this stuff, which of course is just very little information in here, but then I started doing my research and all this stuff starts just popping up all over the place. It's just freaking amazing. So you could blame today's presentation on this stupid little book. But any other questions?
What's the title of that book?
Oh, the title of this book.
And we do have those for sale.
Yeah, they're here. I don't know what they cost. I got like $10, 20 bucks or something. Images of America. Lake County, and there's lots of them. Images of America does this, I think, hundreds of times in different areas, but they've actually done 6 or 7 for Lake County. Images of the Pomo Indian, images of our resorts, images of Lake County. So there's 3 or 4 of them here, but this is the one that started this whole historical journey for me. And so I get a big kick out every time I see this one. It's like, yeah, that's what did it, because I spent a lot of time on this. And in fact, at one point, I was starting to write a novel about this whole thing, try to put all these different elements into one long melodramatic history lesson about it all, but that is on hold. But this is what started it. So yeah, if you guys are interested, see the ladies over here, they got a whole bunch of other books over here that are for sale. This is the one that got me in trouble, so be careful. You might pick one up and might change your whole life. Any other questions?
Do you know why they, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Do you know
Ladies
why
first.
they named her Harry? Did they want a boy? Because she was called Princess Harry. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, the only one was that maybe they were hoping for a boy. They their wealth was related to Cora's father, who was Harry Augustus Lyons. So they named her, for whatever reason, they named her Harry Augustus Lyons Floyd in memory of the father. And she went generally by the family by Hal, but her actual first name was Harry. Now, if you go to Kona Tai today, there's a subdivision because the house survived until 1964, 65. Do we have time? Do we have a little? Okay, 5 minutes. Okay. So the house survives there, and then they're going to be tearing it down because it's at a point of debilitation. Is it worth saving? And an investor came up from San Bruno and said, let's just tear it down. And so they cut out the streets, and they named the streets. So you go up there, you go down Cora, and then the intersection of Richard, and then there's Harry, and then there's Milos, which is Milos Gopchevik. So all the street names, when you're done with that, it's like, wow. There's also some non-native old ancient bushes and trees that were planted by the Floyds that are still there. There's several bushes and trees that they preserve as best they can, and so that's a legacy of it. But the house is gone. Quick little side story. Remember I said that he made his own bricks, and I also said that he came from Peru with chocolate and Peruvian gold doubloons, 30,000 of them. He didn't spend them all. His investments took off so much he never even spent all his gold doubloons, so he just kept them as keepsakes. He had thousands of gold doubloons he just kept for a rainy day. There was a theory that the reason he secretly, without anybody's presence, was making these bricks in his own little brick room was he was putting a gold doubloon in each one of them. So when he used the bricks to build something, that was his own private joke. He's very eccentric. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. Well, I took that piece of information and came up with a little story. So none of this is true, but it's a great story. Was that when they were building Kona Tai, after he died, after Lick died, Floyd needed bricks. He contacted Frazier. Frazier had all of Lick's bricks, thinking they were just bricks. He goes, "I'll give up some bricks. I mean, this guy left a ton of bricks. I'll ship them to you." And he built much of Konata'i with Lick's bricks, unknowing that they were gold doubloons in them. And later, the house gets torn down. A lady who works for me, Irene Rivas, she lives in Scotts Valley, so mid-60s, she gets married. They're building a house. Her husband finds out they're tearing down the house. There's all these supplies, building materials, go up there. He takes a trailer, this part's true, he takes a trailer up there and he loads up a lot of things off the house, including bricks, which today, their house, fireplace, is built with definitely Konata'i's bricks, but with my story, by Lick's bricks, okay? So then I told the story that, and she still has extra bricks left over. So I said, what we're going to find out today is, did he actually put the gold doubloons in the bricks? So she brought me an actual brick from the Konata'i house, which I claimed was actually a Lick brick. And we scored it, put it down on the ground, everybody gathered around, I did a presentation, we hit it. And then with a slight sleight of hand, I had a gold coin that I stuck underneath it. And because I put it there like that, and somebody else hit it, and I said, okay, see what happens. And the guys start throwing, all of a sudden a gold coin appears with all the rubble. And everybody, oh my God, there's a gold coin. There's a gold coin. It was just a, it was like a John F. Kennedy gold coin or something. But no one took note of that right away. Everybody's gasping, and I thought, I can't let this go, because everybody's going to go to her house and tear apart her home. Knock out all of her bricks. You know, so are there gold coins and Lick's bricks, and were they in Konata'i? Well, I've broken about 4 of them open so far, and I still haven't found my first real gold coin, but I'll keep trying to let you know. Actually, if I find one, I won't let you know.
Couldn't a metal detector be scanned
Oh, I
across
would
the...
imagine. There's probably more intelligent ways of doing it. But that's not as romantic as going this whole thing. So, anyway. Any other thoughts or questions? Yes, sir.
Well, I'm just curious about your uniform. I'm sure it's not a private, but who would have worn that uniform?
This would have been a Confederate major, and I didn't know this. My ex-wife now, she made this for me many years ago, and I went to you might have known in South Carolina, they raised the Confederate submarine Hunley, and the bodies were still in it, so I went to the funeral for that. So I thought, you know, let's wear this and kind of show it, we're kind of into it. So I'm walking around Charleston, and all these other people are walking up to me saluting me. And I found out through all that this is a major's uniform. So I'm a major, you know. And people would ask me, are you, because I guess you're a reenactment, you always got to start as a private and work your way up. And when real reenactors found out that I never was in reenacting, and now I'm walking around in a major's outfit, they said, well, you really should be doing that. You should start out with a private outfit. I go, yeah, if I was a real reenactor, you're right.
Impersonating an officer.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the story on that. Any other questions? Yes?
Is that where your heart lies, is in the South?
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, I know it's not politically correct, but my mom told me stories about her actual grandfather, and on one side, and the other side, great-grandfather. They were both Confederate soldiers. They both suffered at the hands of the Yankee. So I was brought up with, you know, the Gone with the Wind version. And and you know, I actually tried to rehabilitate, because in today's political situation, it's like the Confederate flag is evil, the South was evil, what they did. But I won't go into all the details, but there's a lot more to the story. It's rich, and the simplicity of good versus evil was all about slavery. It was largely about slavery, but there's so much more to it, and folks who just kind of dismiss it as simply about that are missing such a great story. So that's what we do at the Civil War Roundtable, and we have great debates. Yes?
One other thing, to connect the house here, the Eli, with the dam, did you touch on it when you were talking about the riffle? Or did they had a vigilante group that gathered here, apparently, at the house to go down and dismantle the dam? Was that the story?
And I think that's the connection to where we are today. This had actually been moved. This used to be like a quarter mile across the street, but basically a lot of the bones of the original house were still within, and it was basically the same exact design. But apparently when those guys got the posse together to go stop the yellow people, it was like, meet at Eli, midnight, you know, and they all came here and got their whatever they did, and they organized here, and from here they staged down there, which would still be, even on horseback, 2 or 3 hours, 4 hours to get down there, I would imagine. How far is Lower Lake from here? About
7 to 10 miles.
Yeah, so a couple hours on horseback maybe.
Yeah.
But so this would have been a good spot to stage for that, wouldn't it? So, Anybody else? Did you have your hand up back there?
I was gonna ask how many people attend your roundtable?
It ranges anywhere from 15 to 40. You know, it averages about 25. And we have different people give us short presentation, and then we just sit around the round table and talk Civil War. And it's all sober. Although one time I did bring some Southern Comfort. It was a very cold night, you know, and I said, you guys all drive home, so you're only getting a little bit, but this will warm me up, and most everybody took me up on it. You know, like, this feels good. So, anybody else? Well, thank you guys. It was really great questions, and thanks for coming.
Thank you.
I'm going to put